Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for taking time out of your mornings and your afternoons to tune into the Experience, Sentiment, and Emotion in Advertising webinar. I promise this content will be intriguing, and we hope to have a healthy discussion at the conclusion where I'm going to encourage all of you guys to participate. So we also are going to promptly finish at 5 of 12. So whatever questions we do not get to, rest assured, we will be sure to follow up with you. It would be great to take a moment and let everybody know where you're calling in from. You can do that in the chat box below there at Zoom. I am Dana DiGregorio. I'm the Managing Director of North America here at Mesh Experience, and I am representing Western New York, hosting and calling in from surprisingly sunny Rochester, New York. So home of the pioneering Susan B. Anthony, the Kodak camera, and the infamous garbage plate, of course. I'm really excited to kick us off today and introduce our guest speakers. So first we have Fiona Blades. Fiona, following a marketing and advertising career, set up Mesh Experience in 2006 to fill in a gap in data and analytics. Brand growth is driven by all experiences people have with brands, yet half or more typically go unmeasured. So by taking an experience-driven marketing approach and capturing how people come into contact with brands in real time, Mesh helps clients like LG Electronics to take quicker and smarter decisions about their investment. Fiona is a fellow in the Market Research Society. She sits on the editorial advisory board of SMR's Research World magazine. She also sits on the board of Wire, Women in Research. She has worked with Professor Hugh Wilson at Cranfield School of Management on a knowledge transfer partnership that was a finalist for the UK award in 2005. We are also joined by Barbara Albert. Bobby is a marketeer with a broad portfolio. She's worked in creative agencies and been a partner in a production company and ran marketing comms for the New York Stock Exchange. She is co-founder and president of Chillmark Digital. The company calling card is Common Sense plus Uncommon Technology, creatively integrated. Bobby helped develop Resync, which is their interactive video optimization platform, which assesses the impact of video metrics and emotion. It gives clients roadmaps for success. She is also a past board member of NIWIFT. And last but not least, we have Bill Harvey. Bill is an innovator and inventor with 35 plus years as a thought leader in media research and a key solution provider to Fortune 500 brands. Bill is the original discoverer of driver tags, which is the first proven scientific development of psychological attribute meta tags for content, so programs, movies, ads, etc. RMT's driver tags have the highest predictivity of Nielsen ratings, series cancellations and renewals, as well as individual viewer likelihood of conversion to specific programs. His most recent work being presented at the ARF shows an ability to lift ROI for brands by over 35%. And another fun fact, Bill is also a novelist, and his latest novel will be coming out on Amazon next week, entitled Pandemonium, live to all devices. In this session, we are going to talk about the power of emotion, sentiment, and data and analytic collaboration as it pertains to marketing and advertising. Sentiment is changing rapidly, and what once was pre-COVID is now no longer in terms of the consumer we knew, as this pandemic lingers on and we face a looming global recession. I'm sure I don't need to tell anybody on this call how important advertising is, but it's a lifeline to building and maintaining brand equity. In fact, it's vital during times of uncertainty and unrest. However, it's critical to understand how advertising is working in the context of the changing consumer sentiment and how it stands up against other paid, owned, earned touch points, and maybe most importantly, how it stands up in the context of your competitor activity as well. What our speakers are going to be taking us through today leans into a key and crucial component, which is understanding experience by tapping into consumer emotion to optimize your advertising. So taking a thorough approach to understanding advertising through the eyes of the consumer versus through the click will help our marketers to unlock insight to make business decisions with greater confidence. Through a combined effort from real-time experience tracking from Mesh Experience, along with second-by-second campaign analysis by Chillmark Digital through their Reasoning platform, and a post-analysis view on ad placement based on our learnings from RMT. We're going to show you how a cohesive approach to understand the consumer in a changing environment can lead to undiscovered insight. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Fiona Blades, the President and Chief Experience Officer of Mesh Experience, to kick us off. Fiona, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dana, and great to be here. Thank you all for joining. We're going to start by looking at advertising in context, which is using both US and UK data from our retail banking studies. And these are just a few of the many photos that are sent in by our participants. In the UK, we saw that early in the pandemic, people were worried about their immediate needs, like how to pay their household bills. But once these were addressed, their concerns then moved to wider societal concerns on what was going to be happening to other people and small businesses. But now people's attention has moved to the longer term concerns. What about the recession, and how are people going to manage through that? And this is very much the same kind of picture that we've been seeing in the US as well. We see that over a third of people are feeling that banks are doing enough to help customers in the pandemic. So this is the backdrop, the sentiment that people have when they're receiving the communications from the banks. And as well, it's the successful communications from these UK banks that have created this impression during the first 6 weeks of the pandemic. And you can see how there has been an improvement in terms of people's perceptions here. Again, we see a similar picture in the US, and what we have here is data that shows that many of the Bank of America and Wells Fargo customers are scoring their bank an 8, 9, or 10 out of 10 on how much their bank is doing to help. And in particular, it was what participants were noticing is the fact that banks were keeping in touch, and they really liked it when they were actually getting a call from their bank. They were also noting things like the safety measures, things like social distancing, which showed that the banks were actually caring for their customers. Now, the previous data that we've just looked at was collected in the first survey of our real-time experience tracking methodology. So following a short survey that a participant does, where we capture their brand perceptions, we then ask the participant to report each brand encounter, whether that's seeing a TV ad or going into a branch or speaking to a friend about the retail bank, and they report each of these in the moment. They're reporting on the brand over 100 different touch points and their reactions to these, and they include things like the comments or those photos that we saw earlier. And this is all in a mobile diary platform. Each participant records their experiences for a week, and then at the end of the week, we ask them some of the same brand health questions that we asked at the beginning of the week. And this way, we can isolate the experience impact on the brand metrics using regression. So this data that we're now looking at comes from this online diary platform. The pie chart on the left shows the percentage of experiences for each touch point. And we can see here that TV, online banking, and email are making up 44% of the experiences in our benchmark data from mid-February to mid-March. And then the trended chart on the right shows how TV dipped early on as the banks took ads off air because they were feeling out of tune, and then picked back up in mid-April. But by early April, we could see that email was really increasing. And this is when banks were sending out very much needed information about things like holiday payments and no fees. And by early June, the branch experiences and the posters were picking up again. While owned experiences like branches, emails, and banking apps have the biggest impact on brand consideration, paid is also a vital marketing lever. And the data we have here uses our experience maximizer analysis, which looks at the change in endorsement for brand consideration by a participant in the pre and the post survey. So owned media is particularly important in maintaining brand consideration. Someone who has an owned media experience is 2.21 times as likely to maintain their consideration as someone who doesn't have an owned experience. And this same pattern is true for the US as well. What we're now looking at is US data, and we can see here that amongst customers, owned channels are more prevalent than for benchmark, and this is particularly the case for Chase and Bank of America. If you look more closely at Chase, you'll see that apart from TV, there isn't that much more paid media that's being picked up by customers in the study. And when we look at specifically how people talk about their digital experiences with Chase, we actually see that these experiences are very helpful and easy to use. And I love this quote about technology rocks. Great experiences as like the app, able to help finish tasks. But that notion of technology rocks, I thought was really nice. In the UK, we saw that certain ads caught the mood at certain times. So remember that early on, people were really concerned about how to pay their bills. So press ads like the Halifax one, which was spelling out very clearly exactly what the bank was doing to help, landed extremely well. A little later, more reassuring advertising, which was highly emotional by Lloyds Bank using their iconic black horse, and this time it had foals with them as well. And that was found to be very, very appealing at that particular time, although it wore out later. After this, there was a lot of the more video Zoom style advertising. And actually those Zoom ads which were featuring staff from branches were well received because they brought a human face to some of the banks. In the US, for example, we saw that TD Bank with the dancing manager worked particularly well. And this was the reaction just after Black Lives Matter was in the headlines. The message was relevant, the style was humorous and upbeat, and it demonstrated a specific benefit. You can see here somebody talking about taking a picture of a check from home. In the UK, Halifax was a star performer. And when we looked at the number of channels that they were using, we could see a much broader mix used by Halifax than by Barclays, NatWest, Lloyds, Nationwide, and HSBC. And if you remember back to the Chase data, we actually saw that Chase was mainly being picked up through TV. So there could be an opportunity for US banks to broaden their channel mix. The use of multiple channels was enabling Halifax to provide a range of different messages to a range of different audiences. So this was also helping as well. Barclays continued a strand of advertising that was focused on technology. And this consistent strand has worked extremely well for Barclays over recent years. We see here through the experience maximizer analysis that actually it was helping people to achieve their goals, and it was making people feel that Barclays was easy to deal with. This particular comment is from somebody who is a millennial. The advert was showing that you can freeze and unfreeze your cards, which is amazing for me as I'm always temporarily losing my cards. And I love this. This will make my life a million times easier. And so you really get that sense of emotion that they felt through that technology that was really helping them. We're now going to actually focus in on the Chase Virtually Anywhere banking ad, because this was one that we saw was coming through very strongly in the US. And here are just a few stills from that ad. When we had a look at plotting how positive and persuasive the different advertising was for banks, we could see that the Chase Virtually Anywhere banking ad was working particularly strongly. And when we have a look at this by positivity, persuasiveness, and relevance, we can see that it was standing out amongst the rest of the banks here. And if we look in real time, we can see how people describe the ad. So here you can see that someone says it allows you to do the following from anywhere: bill pay, checking, savings. So they're really listing all these different features. And somebody else who's saying, I'm very impressed and determined to find out more because I've got a Chase card and I didn't know about this service. So what were the learnings that we could get from this for Chase, from the response by people in real time? The first thing was that COVID-19 was providing a useful context to encourage people to use digital channels. And we could see from the owned spontaneous reactions that the virtually anywhere banking was going to be a relevant theme. we could see that the owned channels have more impact on maintaining and improving brand consideration than paid. And this is where we saw people responding very well as well to Chase, the app itself. And with very rapidly changing consumer sentiment, it was important that the advertising was keeping pace with where people were at in terms of their approach at that moment. And this was animation. And of course, there were a lot of Zoom style ads at the time. So animation did at least differentiate for Chase. A diversified channel mix was delivering the strongest result in the UK. And we've seen that through other data sources as well. And maybe that would have been an opportunity for Chase to diversify a little bit further beyond TV and to be broadening those channels. Barclays advertising, which was showcasing different uses and benefits to customers, has worked really well in the past, and it has significantly impacted on their key brand metrics. So the Chase Virtually Anywhere banking ad was best in class in real time. So we really saw that that was working well. I'm now going to be handing over to Bobby to give a different perspective on how people reacted to this Chase ad second by second. Over to you, Bobby. Bobby, I think you may need to come off mute.
There we go. How's that?
That's great. Over to you.
Okay. So thank you, Fiona. That was a terrific window on the market. And I think it pointed up one of the things that we're all dealing with, which is the speed and intensity of change and how marketers and brands in every category have to be able to respond to it quickly and authentically. You noted that that Chase ad was considered relevant and more persuasive than other banks' advertising. In fact, it did better than other Chase commercials. And you pointed out some of the comments that people made in real-time viewing. But what we were able to take a look at is what actually made it work. What could be improved? What clues are there for the future? Hold on, back to you. What clues are there for the future? Because Chase, like all banks, has to change the way they do business and the way their customers do business. And change is hard, particularly in financial services. In addition, as the virtual transformation accelerates thanks to COVID, a new normal will emerge. So it's important for banks, indeed all brands, to understand the dynamics of response to messaging in this constantly shifting environment. Excuse me, folks, a little bit of allergy creeping in there. And that is why Mesh turned to our Resync content optimization platform for just an in-depth picture of the Chase spot. Thanks. Next, please, Fiona. Because Mesh knows that it's not what you say, it's what they hear. And it's important to uncover those differentiated responses and most critically understand what drives them. And you will see as we go on that it recalls several of the things that we saw in the real-time exposure, but digs beneath the surface to get what was driving it. These filters of perception are key to the points of persuasion, what we call POPs. Next, please. And I'll take you a little bit through the way Resync works to show you how we get at this. Resync is a finely tuned instrument that measures and integrates behavioral data and first-person feedback in real time on an individual data basis, producing data that clients can weave into a richly detailed story. And here's how it goes. When your panelists click on the link to a Resync test, they rate the video with our on-screen slider as they view, and can also respond to a call to action with the clip, which could be asking them whether they would tune out at some point, or on the flip side, asking them if they might want to try a new product. Immediately after they do this viewing, they see clips of the point where they had their high slider rating, their low slider rating, and where they click that action button and are asked questions about those responses. And all data are synced to the video time. So we are getting a richly woven tapestry of everything that happened and why, second by second and synchronized. And because Resync is ubiquitous, it's on all pads, all phones, as well, of course, as browsers. It's convenient to participants, and it also accurately reflects the media landscape and today's lifestyle. Results are on demand in real time. We easily integrate with other databases, as we did with Mesh, to enable deeper analysis. And it's not only effective for single executions, but it can be used for campaigns and for ongoing tracking studies. So it's extremely flexible. Next. So let's take a look at what happened in this Chase ad. Mesh captured experience with the Chase commercial on air. What Resync did was allowed us to get more detailed data and pinpoint the positive and negative impact points. We used a 5-point scale to determine how much people agreed that Chase services serve their needs pre and post viewing. And that dimension really was the measure of the power of this commercial to move people from feeling negative or neutral to agreeing that Chase services served their particular needs. And this turned out to be a critical issue. Before viewing the ad, 64% of men and 53% of women agreed that Chase services suited them. But men also had a higher disagreement level, 14% versus 10% for women. The women, on the other hand, were quite a bit more on the fence. 37 of them were neutral versus 23% for the men. The real story begins, though, after the commercial was viewed, where 70% of the women now agreed that it was relevant. And the male shifts went in both directions, a little bit down as well as a little bit up. The younger cohorts, and Fiona quoted some of them in her portion, behaved more like the women. And in fact, they jumped to 74% agreement, while the older cohort, like the men, were more resistant. So we're seeing female persuasion and younger persuasion points coming out. Next, please. But the really interesting way to look at this is at percent change, because that presents a more dynamic view of persuasion, focusing on direction and momentum. And it also provided added guidance on targeting, because we could see that improvement among men was minimal. Admittedly, men started higher. Nonetheless, they did not go up as high a percent as either the women or the younger people, both of whom went up 32%. For the women, all of that upward shift came out of the neutral territory. But the younger people also moved away from negative ratings up to positive ratings. What we really see as significant here, beyond this directional data, is that the question that we posed about relevance of Chase services to the people in the panel only referred to Chase services in general. This ad was a total mobile ad. And this message, the commercial mobile message, is what influenced change in attitude toward Chase. And since we know that it is the direction that everybody is moving in, that is critical for Chase. Next, please. So let's take a look at what created these different patterns. The commercial, what you're seeing here is looking at the commercial from beginning to end and plotting the total sample in terms of the way they responded to what they were seeing. And we've put frames there to indicate what was going on. And some of these recall the stills that we saw in Fiona's portion. The commercial was created during lockdown. And as Fiona mentioned, it was in animation format. And this slider curve is showing that some features appealed slightly more than others, but overall, the steady pace and tone of this advertising, which you can kind of see by looking at the frames, is reflected in the gentle slope of the response. Respectable numbers, no significant pops, no significant dips, and no abrupt moves. Next, please. But it's a bit like a duck gliding on the water. You know, you see those little webbed feet paddling away beneath the surface, and that's what's propelling them forward. That's the same kind of effect that we are seeing here. It was really under the surface that the story of the commercial unfolds. And if you remember, that a key measure was the change in agreement that Chase services suited people's needs. This is particularly relevant. 18% of the sample fell into this persuaded group. They not only rated the commercial higher overall with our slider, that is 65 versus 62 for the total sample, which you would probably expect since they were the persuaded group, but they also reached a markedly higher high point. Their high point was 75 on average versus 66 for the total sample. And we can start to see discernible pops, those individual points of persuasion, and also a much more active engagement pattern. So even if there are downs, we also know that there's a rhythm to a commercial. And when you see ups and downs, you're seeing more engagement than when you see a flat line. Next, please. So what moves them? The two strongest pops, and this is echoing what we heard before from Fiona, were at getting balances and seeing transactions on their phones. And near the end, also what I'll call couch potato banking, that they were able to do comfortably from anywhere at home. A note here also is that when you see comments at the end that relate to a specific point, very frequently that's also representing a cumulative positive feeling near the end of the commercial. So we're seeing here that the people who were persuaded liked the convenience and liked some particular transactions. Next, please. But let's take a look at that in context. Those positive forces need to be seen against what kept other people stuck in that neutral or negative territory. And these more resistant people were 25% of the sample. Their average rating was really poor. It was south of the neutral 50 that our slider starts at. And it only crept up to a high of 52. And these are, I can tell you from years of doing this, these are pretty dismal results. So we have a group that really resisted that message. What turned them off? Let's take a look at the next slide, please. Online bill paying in particular left this group cold. And importantly, they generally disliked mobile apps, especially for banking, or just didn't like to use mobile apps in general. So what appeared at first to be a successful commercial in general actually turns out to have had a polarizing effect on portions of the panel. One size clearly did not fit all. And the key is connecting underlying sentiment to these differences, which is part of what makes resync unique. So let's take a look at our time-synced feedback. If you would, Fiona, go to the next one. What we're seeing here are the individual likes of the people who were persuaded. And the visual is showing the five-second segments of the ad in which at least one person in the persuaded group registered their highest slider point. The opening segment did not have that, and so we haven't shown it on this particular slide. Each of these time-synced segments is a response from a single person at the time of their highest point, and each person has his and her highest and lowest point individually. What stands out is how distinctively men and women express what they like. And really, the first thing that we saw was that women gave you a lot more detailed feedback. And what that played out in is they were also much more specific about what they liked and why they liked it. They found things helpful or useful for specific reasons, very much task-oriented, whereas the men focused much more on general convenience and took far fewer words to tell you that they liked that. That is critical because we're seeing that the two segments perceived different benefits from the same features and expressed it very differently. And that is a signal to take a look going forward, not just what people like, but how people evaluate what is of value to them. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to see the reverse side of this coin. And that is among the people who weren't persuasive, what they had to say. The very things that attracted both the men and the women who were persuaded were often the features that alienated, unmoved viewers. This is a pattern that we see sometimes, and it always gives interesting direction to a client. And this recalls that polarizing pattern we saw in the power line slider for the positively impacted and more resistant groups. One of the negative comments among the women here should be a real flag for Chase, because they were pointing out how you could look at checks online and how you could deposit checks through your mobile. And there were several comments who really, in essence, said, who uses checks? They seem like a vestige of another time in this mobile context. So while they may be a benefit that Chase is putting forward, they may be a feature that people consider outmoded. And that is something that definitely should be investigated as Chase navigates change. It also has implications for creative approaches when we see how the men and the women and also other groups vary in response to the same stimuli. Next, please. I'm going to take a little side step here because there's something that I like to call beacons and flags that we see and always look for in our results. And we saw them to great effect in this commercial. There are things that are not playbacks of the leading message points of the commercial, but are telling you what's important to people. And when you keep in mind that this was a feature-rich commercial, mention of something other than a feature is a great indication of something that is on people's minds. And we got mentions of people being pleased to see that Chase had included, even in animation, diversity in their commercial. And it is a sign that banks will be judged going forward, not only on their service features, but how they serve the community. And here, even though only 2 people mentioned this, because this was their highest point and other people had other high points, we are sure that this is a sentiment that other people feel, even if you don't see it expressed a lot. On the other side, there were a lot of style comments that people had, and this is equally important. And there were 2 negative themes that emerged. One was, if you have services that are not exclusive, don't tell me about them. I don't want to know about me too. And that is, I think, a great indication for Chase going forward. The other thing is, don't be redundant. We got it. You don't have to tell us too many times. Next, please. So in the face of this continuing pandemic, with everything that we have seen now in Fiona's portion and in our taking a deeper detailed look at what is driving people's response to the commercial, in the face of economic instability and social upheaval, what can we take away from this? Next one, please, Fiona. And now the digital genie is out of the bottle, so there is no going back on that. How can we help Chase and other brands? Next, please. The first thing is, we know they have to do change the way they do business and bring their customers along. And change is very hard. If you doubt that change is hard, I just want to give you one thing to think about. It took 10 years for ATMs to achieve even a measurable level of market penetration. What we learned, next please, is that mobile banking can be polarizing, both in terms of the elements that alienate people and attract people, and in the different ways that they appeal to different market segments. These dichotomies really should be looked at as Chase goes forward, not only because we saw them strongly, but because, as Fiona pointed out, things are changing so rapidly in the marketplace that what we are seeing today, we can't guarantee we're going to see next week. And men and older people were harder to convince, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it. Next, please. Why is this all important? Because different people hear different things in the same messaging. And that is a dynamic that you have to understand in order to tailor persuasive messages going forward. So finally, what would we tell Chase? Next one, please. First of all, listen closely to your consumers and do it often, and monitor market change at the same time. so that you are aware of the context and the changing influences that people are responding to. Use the positive attitudes of the people who are in your corner to help pull through the people who are more resistant to change. And also use different ads for different motivational segments. So with that, that is the perfect segue to Bill Harvey. Bill is going to talk about his analysis of the role emotion plays in ads and the implications for media placement as well as creative. Now, the one and only Bill Harvey.
Thank you, Bobby. Jerry Zaltman, the Harvard Don, taught us that 95% of decision-making is subconscious. So very impressed with that. We set out years ago with the question of how do we use the tools we've got, big data, AI, to measure the subconscious? And our answer is by observing the content that people consume. You are what you eat through your eyes and your ears. If you mostly watch programs about love, we know that love is important to you. Next slide, please. The way our science is being used today is to place media to reach people motivated by the motivators we find in your ad, and to reach them through contexts that also have the same motivators as your ad. Impartial third-party research finds that this protocol greatly increases advertising effectiveness, both in terms of branding metrics and sales metrics. Next slide, please. So the real question was, if we're going to code content using psychological words, how do we winnow down the more than 13,000 psychological words in the English language? We used machine learning in a continuous set-top box data feedback loop to recommend programs to people. And these were people in their own homes, obviously. And that taught us that 265 of these words are the most predictive of viewing behavior. Simmons later on also showed that they also are the 265 drivers that also drive buying behavior. We call those driver tags. And they include emotions and moods, but they also include human values, character and personality traits, mindsets. It's much more than just emotions. We roll up the 265 driver tags into 86 need states, which we then roll up into 15 motivations. Next slide, please. Half a century ago, Abraham Maslow hypothesized that people who became self-actualized go through 4 earlier stages to get there. And he did this intuitively. Independent of that, we set out to find out what we could about the mind. We had no lens. We weren't thinking Maslow. It came out the way it came out. And yet we can see the relationship of our findings to Maslow. For example, in the Maslow stage right before self-actualization, esteem, we found 8 types of esteem. We also found 3 types of self-actualization and so on, as you see here. Next slide, please. So that's a backdrop on how we do what we do. Now, how do we apply that to the same chase ad that we're all looking at through our different research techniques? The motivations that are strongest in the content of the ad itself are innovation, creativity, competency, power, and learning. And putting those ideas together suggests to us that the next ad that Chase makes could be even stronger by showing a first-time user of the app learning it easily, becoming instantly competent with it. Next slide, please. Now, Bobby mentioned using different ads for different motivational segments, and that's exactly what we're looking at here. With our partner Sumasio, we've got 276 million Americans coded by their motivations. So for example, in terms of creativity, innovation, there are 26.6 million IDs in the US. Those are de-identified, no PII, but you can reach these people through Google, Facebook, et cetera, or addressable TV. And over on the right, you see that that group of 26.6 million people who are motivated by creativity and innovation have an index of 1,069. In other words, they're 10 times the population in terms of the degree to which they're motivated by that motivation. So you could have 4 different ads and aim them at 4 different groups. Next slide, please. Now, through our partner, Reset Digital, who's a programmatic technology company, we could even break ads into modules that have different motivations in each module. We could have AI in Reset Digital put together the ads in a microsecond on a personalized basis to reflect which motivations drive that individual the most, which mixture of motivations that individual combines, and what the context says about which motivations are going to be best to deliver in this ad at this moment to this person. Next slide, please. So this is one of the several third-party validations of our method. This is a Turner study performed by Nielsen NC Solutions, formerly known as Nielsen Catalina. They found double-digit increases in the advertising sales effect for the parts of a campaign having the highest resonance between the ads and the programs they're placed within. Next slide, please. So the same Chase ad would perform much better in the programs on the left that you see here than on the programs on the right. Now you may wonder what these resonance scores aren't based on the 15 motivations. They're based on the 265 driver tags. And why do so many have the same exact score? Well, we have over 6,000 programs in the database. And if you look over on the right, why are all those programs at exactly 3.4%? Well, that's because there are 29 driver tags in that ad. And one driver tag match between the ad and the program would give you 3.4% resonance. So it may be a different one that's matched in Archer versus Barter Kings, but those on the right are the programs that had the least resonance above the ones that were 0. Next slide, please. Now, when we drill down deeper than the 15 motivations, down to the 86 need states, we get more insight here. Power came out in the motivation level, but now we also see freedom, liberty, comfortable with oneself, being an effective worker, having a winning attitude, tranquility, serenity, at ease, minimalism, simplicity in one's life. These are end state benefits. Like in a QSR ad, when you show somebody biting down on a hamburger and having a big smile on their face. Future ads could dramatize, probably not in animation, but they could dramatize with real human actors and actresses that there's real emotional benefit to having the app to be able to get rid of the time wasted on chores and use it better in your life. Next slide, please. So our key takeaways, and these probably are best applied to the next new ad that Chase creates, but they could have gotten some of it into the ad had we analyzed the storyboard. We would have recommended, as I just said, the end state benefits being visible on the faces of the satisfied customers, but also showing what the screens look like on the app in reality. And somebody opening the app for the first time, finding it obvious, intuitive, how they got it instantly. I think, you know, what the findings that Fiona and Bobby were reporting suggested to me that that group that was polarized negatively may have some, you know, fear about learning how to do these things, We know that techno fear exists as a reality, and you could overcome it by dramatizing the simplicity of how easy it is to learn this app. And certainly pointing out the features that are exclusive to Chase among the major banks. I'm not sure that all of the banks have the ability to photograph a check, which I find very useful. And that, of course, it's all would be aimed as making the creative have the maximum impact and getting switching to Chase from other banks. During this time period, we are seeing bank switching, particularly in the US, as a result of banks not giving out the small business loans that were expected. And so there's this is a good time for banks to grow their user base. And of course, what we propose is that people take advantage of the fact that you can now create different ads with different motivations and reach different audiences with them and take advantage of the context effects. So I think what we see here, looking across the three presentations, is a tremendous amount of complementarity. There's cases where we support each other. There's cases where we add more information to each other. This is, some of the value of the richness of combining technologies and research. So I think we're now done with the presenting part. Now, turning it over to the question and answer section. I think this is where we turn our pictures on too.
Yes. Thank you so much, Bill, Bobby, and Fiona. That was great. I have loads of questions that I've written down here, but I'm wondering if maybe we should open it up to anybody on the call, if anybody has any specific questions for the collective team or individuals, feel free to pose it in the chat box below. But while I don't see any quite yet, I'll wait to see if any pop up. I do have a question. I'm going to kick it off to all three of you. So I love what you just said, Bill, about the solutions being complementary in many cases. But I'm wondering if maybe individually you three can talk about the practicality of your methodologies and solutions. So what do these things practically enable clients to do or to uncover? And maybe if we can use a situation outside of retail banking or financial services to broaden, that would be great. Fiona, I'll have you start.
Thanks very much, Dana. I'm going to use a packaged goods example because I think what the real-time experience tracking approach can help clients to do is to actually optimize and adjust campaigns as they are in field. And we did this with Wilkinson Sword, launching Hydro in Germany. Over here, that is Schick Hydro. And literally, we were able to let them know that things like the digital was working better than the newsprint, and they switched over there. We were able to let them know that the TV ad had not worn out, and therefore they could repurpose it, and it became even more powerful when they did a tag on. And we were able to reassure them at each step along the way that with that launch, they were optimizing their investment. So I think that's one of the things that the real time can do. It puts it in context over time, and you can make those changes and you can make savings as a result.
Great. Bobby.
Okay, before I give an example, I just want to refer back to something that Bill said, which was really interesting, talking about advertising modules, because one of the things that we have the capability of doing is switching up content while people are viewing and responding to it. So based on the way they might respond to one module, you would be able to show them one of a choice or more than one of a selection of other modules and be able to get different combinations that work for different market segments. So I think that really is an interesting point, and we can do this very rapidly to Fiona's point of being able to do this in real time. I'm going to give you an example of a pharma commercial. It's very recent, and so I'm not, because of where things are, I'm not allowed to reveal the name of a client, but it's a terrific example because this was a product that was very, very desirable to an isolated market segment that they were addressing. The people loved the product. They thought they needed it. They wanted to try it. They so hated the execution. There was one person that liked the execution, and we wondered about her. Everybody else, some people had different reasons for hating it, but they came back to pretty much a common core. And that set of results went to the board of that company because this was going to be a major launch and positioning of this product. And they would have totally blown it if they had gone out with this execution. So they are now in process of going back to square one, but knowing, having the assurance that they are absolutely on the right track with their market and their product and the features and the end benefits. And they just have to present it in a way that doesn't make people run screaming from the screen.
I think that the combination of these three technologies would be useful in any vertical. In advertising and movies and restaurants and travel and financial services and CPG, pharma, politics. But what comes to mind is we did some work recently for a over-the-counter drug, and kind of a natural organic species of over-the-counter drug. And we were given storyboards to content code, and we made some suggestions which resulted in the ad becoming much more emotional in its impact. But I'm very impressed by both the mesh and chill mark techniques, and can see how if we were working together in that particular instance, we would have come back with a wealth of knowledge and know-how that would have made the ad much more impactful than it even was after we got finished with it. So there are many sides of the human mind and the human personality, and advertising is just as complicated. It's got all the different facets of a diamond. Any one approach is not going to yield. This is 1 + 1 = 5.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, we are big advocates of finishing on time and finishing promptly, and having people who are jumping from meeting to meeting have 2 seconds to grab a drink in between. But one thing I wanted to leave everybody with here is a question on the so what, right? So I've seen all the key takeaways from each of you individually. I would love for you to tell me and tell us all what your so what would have been for Chase, right? What was the key learning in one sentence for if you were speaking with Chase ad? What would you tell them?
I think they had the right message for the time, but I was very interested to see that what we picked up was obviously where it was being advertised, and certain people were picking it up. Maybe some of those people were not picking it up that Bobby then spoke to, and we could see that people perhaps were tuning it out. But I thought it was the right ad for the right time.
Brilliant.
And I would echo that, but say not for everybody. And that was the key thing, is that when you go beneath the surface, and back to those little ducks, the activity beneath the surface is really what is going to drive response. And so we were able to see the differentiated response to the same messaging. And I would suggest to them always go beneath the surface and see what your different segments are responding to, and then use that to address them each in the most effective way.
Yeah, totally concur. And what we felt was that making it more experiential, making it more like a first-time user experience, and showing that there was really nothing to worry about. It wasn't going to be a terrible learning challenge. It was going to do itself automatically and make your life better. Great.
What I've jotted down here is time matters, right? Differentiate, and lean into experience. Do the job. So with that, I'm going to conclude. Thank you all so much. This has been excellent. If anybody has any questions, feel free to get in contact. And yeah, I think this has been really informative. Thank you all so much.